I've always been a big proponent of the idea that companies are one of the most incredible inventions of human society, like, or civilization in general, is the ability for a group of people to come together and separate management from operations and from legally liable directors and shareholders, like separating each of those layers, being able to operate towards the solving of a problem, or some sort of solution, is a magnificent thing. And where Bitcoin changes it is that I've kind of called it responsibility go up technology, in the sense that the responsibility element of Bitcoin, and companies or nations, I think nation states is probably pushing it too far, but companies, the corporate model of solving a problem and taking the responsibility for a fee makes perfect sense on a Bitcoin standard.
Bitcoin is a magic technology that offers benefits to any individual or entity that adopts it. Yes,
Hmm.
and on the other hand, the simplest way in which to adopt it right now is as a long-term store of value asset if you're a private entity and you're not subject to gap-based accounting. And the other ways you can adopt it, they have more friction, accounting friction, tax friction, compliance friction. For example, like we can agree that it would be good if banks banked Bitcoin, that would be good. But many banks are afraid to do this due to FDIC guidance. I think today there was just a story coming out that Citigroup announced that they will probably start to custody Bitcoin. So what we need is we need to educate the regulators, educate the politicians, and then as the FDIC and FASB and the SEC and the CFTC and the OCC and every other agency starts to understand and provide useful guidance, then all those companies will start to take much larger positions, and then the investment community will support that, and Bitcoin will spread as technology. And the best way to get them to provide that constructive guidance is just avoid taking unnecessarily adversarial positions in the evangelism or the advocacy. Right? We don't need to end the dollar or end the Fed in order to spread the good cheer of Bitcoin. We can make everybody in the United States could be better off, right, without dramatic changes to the government. If there was 100x as much Bitcoin, they'd all be better off right now without changing anything in the government. So the world's full of challenges. There are a lot of, I mean, there are a lot of things that are inefficient in the world. We could talk about them for 100 hours. But I think the whole point of laser eyes is focus your energy. So if I'm going to, what is a laser? A laser is I have a certain amount of energy and I narrow my focus to a pen head, a pen prick, the narrowest focus possible. And why do I do that? So I can go the longest distance without dissipation. So every time you broaden your focus, you dissipate your energy and you lose your reach. And so the question really is what can you accomplish, and how are you going to accomplish it? You're not you're not going to fix every company, every government in the near, every bank and every government future with the Bitcoin message. Right? I tend to look at it a different way, which is there are some entities that can adopt it now, and we should go find them and help them do it.
Hmm.
There are some places where it's just going to be a very, very difficult or impossible. Then don't waste your energy. Don't waste your energy fighting with them. Don't. You're not going to change their mind. Don't squander your energy. You don't have time, and you don't have the energy to pick fights with people, along the road of life. Right? You should just move on. Let me offer another possible metaphor here. Let's say I invented a fusion reactor, and it generated infinite energy
Hmm.
for $1. I can give you enough energy to run your family for the rest of your life for $1. Okay, so I'm going to go travel around the world, and where am I going to be happiest with that fusion reactor? Well, I go to North Korea, and they find out I have it, and I'm not allowed to own things, and they take it away from me and they kill me. Okay, that didn't work so well.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a fusion reactor. No, maybe I take it to a place where there's no rule of law, so the government just seizes it. Right? Maybe I take it to a country where there's 100 different tribes and they're all warring with each other, and so I set up and I'm living happily ever after. And one tribe hears about me with another tribe dancing, and they come and they kill me. Okay, no rule of law, no peace. I go to another country and their taxes are excessive, and they find out that I have a nuclear reactor or a fusion reactor, so they just tax me to death and I lose it. I mean, the short of it is, you have a great technology, it's magical. You want to live in a country where they speak your language, where where there's a rule of law, where there's peace, where there's a police force. Like, what if your neighbor just comes over with a gun and shoots you in the head and takes your fusion reactor? Right? The fusion reactor doesn't solve all your problems. Right? The fusion reactor doesn't make Afghanistan a peaceful place to live for an American, that practices Christianity either, right? Like, there are simple common sense observations, which is, you have a technology, you go to a politically supportive place, and you wouldn't go to a country and say, I have a fusion reactor and I'm giving away power for free to everybody in the country, and I'm putting the nation's electric power provider out of business because they're evil people because they sell the electricity. Right? That's not the best way to do it, right? You're probably better off to go to the country's monopoly energy provider and offer to set up the fusion reactor for them so that they can harness it. And part of you would say, well, they really should give away the energy for zero, but they're going to charge a penny a kilowatt hour. But if they were charging 10 cents a kilowatt hour, then getting them to lower the price to a penny a kilowatt hour is a benefit to everybody, and they get a piece of the action. And you're not a revolutionary, you're an evolutionary, you're a technologist, right? And we move forward. So I think that that's the case with any great technology. The technology is not enough for you to go, anywhere and right any wrong. And you don't really need to make it a political fight in order to spread the technology. Most people, if they see an automobile and it'll get them from point A to point B in an hour instead of walking for 2 days, they could be persuaded, regardless of political conviction and religious conviction, that the automobile is a good idea. Right? They have automobiles in a lot of countries that don't agree with American politics, and vice versa. So, and likewise, right? Crude oil, aluminum, steel, automobiles, airplanes have all been, you know, enthusiastically adopted in communist, socialist, capitalist, autocratic, theocratic states. Even enthusiastically adopted in countries with hyperinflation. Right? They may be hyperinflating, but they still appreciate steel in the building. Right? If you ever walk out on the 15th floor of a building without the steel and the floor collapses and you and all your friends die, right? Then you could be persuaded that steel is a valuable technology. And the key there is, whoever sells the steel needs to make it an apolitical statement. And I think with Bitcoin can be spread everywhere on Earth, as digital energy, right? As a technology, right? If Bitcoin is digital energy, then it's simply the next evolution of electricity, or oil, or atomic power, or hydropower, or solar power, or the internet. It's just the next thing. If Bitcoin's got to be a digital currency, then you're going to have to replace the government, right? either peacefully or in a hostile fashion. You got to replace the government. It's just like, given, if I were to try to calculate the difference in effort, one of the things is like a million times harder to do, plus a lot of bloodshed, right? Castro replaced the government, but like, would you want to do that? I mean, even if I told you you could, like, we had a civil war in the United States, right? Like, you don't really want a civil war. There's no winners. And
It's
so I think that the Bitcoin community has an opportunity to embrace the technology, spread it to everywhere, and be everybody's friend. And I think that's something we ought to be spending more time thinking about. And I think we should spend a lot less time fighting over the currency, because once you've made the point that the currency has inflation, I think you just got to move on, because the next debate is whether or not gold is better than Bitcoin for fighting inflation, right? Because you're not going to actually eliminate the source of inflation, right? That will require regime change. If we demonetize everything everywhere, maybe we cure half of the problem, which is good. I think that's enough. It might take 100 years. I'm hard pressed to think it takes less than 100 years. Feels like it's like a multi-generational exercise if we're successful. And then at the end of it, you're still going to have debates about whether to give 4-year-old kids pharmaceutical products to treat their ADD, right? You're still going to have debates over religion. You're still going to have debates over, someone at age 87 is dying and someone wants to give them $1 million treatment and someone else says that that's too expensive, right? And you're going to have all those issues. And, you know, someone's born and they just have a view that they should beat you. Okay, it's going to happen. We're not going to, some other science or technology breakthrough might address some of that problem. And we still got the problem of how do we go to Mars, and should we stop there, and should we go to Alpha Centauri or beyond? These are all problems, and some people want to live forever, and that the problem is we can't live forever. And other people don't think we should live forever. And the problem is stopping the people that want to live forever, right? And those things are going to go on. We're not going to address those. I don't think we need to. I think that the root problem that Bitcoiners put their fingers on is there's a lack of conservation of energy in the civilization. There's an energy imbalance, and everything that we think of as money, that we use as money, and right now we use gold, and we use $90 trillion of currency derivatives and $100 trillion of bonds, and we use trillions of dollars of equity, and we use collectibles, we use all sorts of other derivatives. There's a lot of things we use as money. All of those things we use as money are low velocity, inefficient transmitters of energy that drain energy. And the cost of that you could measure in the tens of trillions, 10 trillion, 20 trillion a year. So some huge amount, right? 20 trillion is the GDP of the United States, right? Nominally measured. So the cost of the broken money, or the lack of a proper monetary system, is many, many trillions a year, compounding for the last 100 years, for the next 100 years. Fixing that is, it's no different than if you're an athlete and you were bleeding a pint of blood an hour, and I didn't stop the bleeding, right? I mean, the number one rule of triage is stop the bleeding first. Well, first make sure you can breathe,
totally,
right?
yeah.
3 minutes without air and you're dead, and then make sure your bleeding stops, because you'll bleed out in a few minutes. And then after that, figure out what the rest of the problem is. So I think that we should think of ourselves as trying to stop the bleeding. The source of the bleeding is a lack of effective money. And the human race has never had an effective money, a mathematically sound, thermodynamically sound money, right? Gold was the closest thing, but it's way too inefficient. It bleeds energy too fast in time and in space, right? You can't really use it. So we now have a situation where 10 basis points of the civilization has a limited has an effective store of value, and of course nobody has an effective medium of exchange, right? So you could probably say it's like 2 or 3 or 4 basis points of the entire economy is efficient. 99.95% of all the economic activity in time and in space is woefully inefficient.
Totally.
And how inefficient? You know, you, it, we probably got to assume we're losing 10 to 15% of energy. If you were writing a calculus equation, right? The time variable was losing 15% of your energy with time. And then there's another dissipation coefficient, which is how much energy per transaction.
Oh, there's
You
that. Then
know,
there's the cost of the institutions. There's the cost of the misallocation and
yeah.
malinvestment, blind consumerism. You know, the gambling, the distortion of people's time preferences. So yeah, there's waste all over the place.
Well, if you just come back to this idea that we're like 3 basis points, 1, 2, 3 basis points permeated, you can see that a factor of 10, gets you to 30 basis points.
Mm-hmm.
A factor of 100 gets you to 3% of potential.
Mm-hmm.
So 100x from now, we're 3% of potential.
Mm-hmm.
1,000x from now, we're 30% of potential. And so there's massive, tremendous opportunity here. And we can do this in a very cheerful, constructive way simply by focusing people on the technology and just showing them how much more efficient, how much higher the quality of living is for any entity, any part of our civilization, should they adopt a better energy technology.
Do you think that's tricky in because I agree with you in some sense, but I feel like the the level of craziness and the level of intervention and the level of kind of like what Alan Watts would call like do-goodery, right? Like these, you've got people who, whether their intent is good or bad, irrespective, their process is a little bit ridiculous. And ESG is one of these examples, right? It's trying to pretend your way into prosperity. It's let's wrap corporations and institutions and companies and at some point individuals into another set of arbitrary rules for the stated purpose of saving energy or doing social good or good governance or whatever, but you actually end up doing the opposite. So you know in many ways Bitcoin ends up in the firing line of that, whether we like it or not, and we can be as apolitical as we want about it, but there comes a point where you need to sort of draw the line and say, well, no, this is, we're jumping off a cliff here. This behavior is ridiculous. Sri Lanka, I saw Marty Bent posted something about Sri Lanka today, who was one of the first countries, messing around with this ESG stuff. And, they're having a collapse of food and energy and all this sort of stuff. So I feel like it's tricky. It sounds nice in principle to be apolitical, but at the same time, it's almost impossible to kind of stay apolitical when
I,
everything is becoming political.
so I think that you have to engage in the political dialogue. That's true. But you also can do it in a constructive way, or you can do it in a destructive way. For example, um, the ESG narrative is just used by a competitor to undermine another competitor. So the oil companies used ESG to get people to shut down nuclear power plants.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you're if you're going to be effective, you need to identify who your real enemy is. Your enemy, the enemy of the nuclear power plants, wasn't people that wanted to protect the environment. The enemy of the nuclear power plant was lobbyists paid off by oil companies to shut them down. And if you actually put that front and center, you'd probably be much more effective. Um, when online gambling was shut down, it was Indian reservations funneling money through fundamentalist Christian organizations to a lobbyist in D.C. that convinced politicians that gambling online is an abomination in the eyes of God. Okay, so if you're supporting online poker, you could declare war on, like all of the evangelical Christians and 25 million Southern Baptists, but they weren't really your enemy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your enemy was a couple of marketing people working for a casino on a reservation that actually, staged a guerrilla marketing effort. And if you were to go to every church, and protest against the churches and say, the churches are our enemy and Christianity is the enemy, you would have picked a fight that you can't win
Mm-hmm.
that was unnecessary. The ESG objections to Bitcoin, they don't come from environmentalists. They don't come from institutional investors either. They come from altcoiners. It's the proof of stake networks that pay the lobbyists to lobby the politicians. They write the op-ed pieces. They plant the stories. They pay for the academic research. All of this stuff is sponsored by other crypto competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were to say, oh, well, the Europeans are stupid, or the politician is stupid, or the environmentalists are our enemy, or big companies are our enemy, or the institutional investors are our enemy, you would be basically chasing a red herring, right? You effectively, what's going on is your enemy wants you to go to war with someone 100 times as big as you, and they're laughing their ass off, and you're taking the bait. It's like I go into a town, and there are two gangs and they each have 100 warriors. So I kill one of the warriors from one gang and I pin it on the other gang. And I kill one of the guys from the other gang and I pin it on the first gang. And I leave town and I wait for the two gangs to kill each other. And then I come back and take over. You see, this was all just a false flag operation
Mm-hmm.
of sorts. So yeah, that doesn't mean you can't get engaged with politics, but you probably should keep in mind, who you're really competing against. Generally, its competitors are weaponizing the political process to defeat their rival, right? And if I'm going to do it, right, I have to wrap myself in the mantle of being environmentally friendly, or I have to be doing it for the public good, right? Like my competitor, whatever is bad for the environment, and then I get some politician to do that, and the politicians are going to want some moral justification, but ultimately, if you follow the money, you'll find that they're just supporting another competitor, and it works both ways, right? Ironically, the oil companies buried the nuclear power companies using the political process, and then later on, the solar and the wind people
Did the
bury the
same to
oil
them.
companies
Yeah.
using the same process. They're just weaponizing the political process. So you can't not engage, but um, you can be a little bit more thoughtful about how you engage
Mm-hmm.
and figure out who really is who is driving the narrative. And generally, most of these organizations, they're influenced by their donors to do whatever is right. It's interesting if you look at the American Diabetes Association. Who gives money to the American Diabetes Association in order to fight diabetes?
Isn't it like Coke and Pepsi and all those guys, or the
And
candy companies?
and when you read the masthead, it says something like, "Well, we don't really know what causes diabetes." Okay. But we do know what causes diabetes, but the organization doesn't want to say what causes diabetes because, to a certain degree, their sponsors have a vested interest in no one deciding what causes diabetes. It's better if it's just an unfortunate disease that we can treat with expensive drugs.
Well, yeah, but see, at what point does one draw the line and stop playing within a false Overton window, right? Because that's what all of these things seem to be. I guess what I'm hearing from you is that the strategy is, you use their Overton window and use their arguments, kind of like almost like an Aikido, flip the energy back their way versus, the other strategy being more confrontational and just saying, no, that I will not operate in that Overton window. Like, this is true and this makes sense over here, not over there. So I don't know. It's a tricky one. I mean, I'm obviously more confrontational. When I see something stupid, I need to point out that it's stupid because it's stupid, um, and it's a tricky one.
Yeah, I think it's complicated. Your best strategy is the strategy which persuades the people with the power to support your point of view, right? If you don't persuade the people with the power to support your point of view, you haven't succeeded. So you just got to figure out how to do that. Generally, I find that being constructive and cheerful and educational is a lot more effective than being toxic and confrontational. Look on Twitter, if you're toxic and confrontational, you just get blocked, and then you have no influence over anybody that follows that person ever again. So, if you walk into a mayor's office and you're toxic and confrontational, you just get kicked out, and that's the end of that. And they just assume that whatever you liked is wrong, and not only do they not give you what you wanted, they go out of their way to not give you what you wanted because it's personal. So I
Mm,
think you never really want to make it personal, and there's that phrase, those the gods would destroy they first make mad.
mm,
And the other point is, do you want to succeed, or do you just want to fight? Right? Because the if we come back to Sun Tzu and the like, right, the ideal thing is to win the war without fighting,
mm.
not to engage in 100 battles that you win, right? And so, coming back to Bitcoin, what you want is for every nation, organization, and individual to embrace it and support it. That's what you want.
It's
So if
a
you're if you're, if you're spending a lot of time to tell the world why somebody is stupid and has a character flaw, right? You're ripping somebody else down, but that's not building up Bitcoin, right? Ultimately, you got to choose your fights very carefully. And I think there's some fights worth taking. For example, I think it's reasonable to fight the gold bugs because we both agree with sound money, but every dollar invested in gold is a dollar not invested in Bitcoin. And that's a battle we can win. We should win because it's a benefit to them when they switch. It's a benefit to Bitcoin when they switch.
Mhm.
Right? I don't think it's all that constructive to fight a battle to eliminate the euro. Right? Like the odds of actually persuading 20% of gold bugs to abandon gold and adopt Bitcoin as their reserve currency are a lot higher than the odds of persuading 20% of the Europeans to stop using the euro and leave the EU. You see, so there are some battles that just I don't think make that much sense, and other battles make a lot of sense. There are ones that are winnable, and by the way, the best battle, if if you must fight a battle, the battle you want to fight is against ignorance and the past in favor of the future. Everybody wants to go into the future, knows they're going into the future. And you'll find, I would think 95% agreement. If I said, do you think modern technology can make your life better? I think you find not everybody. Some people would say I want to live off the grid, with 19th century tech, but most people would say, yeah, modern technology is generally better and I want to embrace it. So if you look at the really powerful entities and companies that grow very rapidly, they grow by not forcing people to make a difficult decision. I give away free Facebook. I give away free Google. Like how hard is it for Google to spread to 1 billion people? They give it away for free. They don't tell you have to abandon your religion or abandon your nation or abandon your citizenship or fight with your government or fight with your employer. They just give you free search. So so I think that the best thing is just give people technology. Technology represents something better in the future that came out of human ingenuity. The and if you can do that, you don't have to fight with anybody, right? You're pure education. The next best is, if you must fight, is fight a battle to persuade people that they're better off buying a Bitcoin than buying a rental apartment as a store of value, or they're better off buying a Bitcoin than buying a bar of gold. And explain to them why Bitcoin is better than a bar of gold, or better than a rental apartment, or better than, a bunch of lumber in the back of the house. And, if you frame it like that, right, the nation of lumber is not going to get offended. I mean, we're probably, the gold bugs get a little bit upset, but again, at the end of the day, they're the most organized. What about all the other, the person that wants you to buy 3 apartment units and Airbnb them on the weekend in order to like retire? That person's not going to fight you back. So I think if you fight that asset war, there's $100 trillion there, right? We're less than 500 billion. So Bitcoin can increase by a factor of 200 from here, simply by getting people to change their asset allocations. And so between that and technology, those are just educational pursuits. And then you're gonna have competitors that'll say, yeah, well, don't use Bitcoin.
Buy my shitcoin.
Use my proof of stake thing and do it without electricity. And you're going to have to explain that without the electricity, you don't have a commodity, you have a security. And a security needs to be registered and taken public with full and fair disclosures because it's centralized. You need to explain that in a cheerful, constructive way, but you need to explain it. And then maybe you need to explain how, irregardless of all those things, right, the Bitcoin network is 10,000 times more secure and more reliable and more long lived than the other thing. And so you have to explain that. But you're better off, I think a classic marketer would say, you're better off to segment the market. You're better off to say, Bitcoin is digital energy. It's a commodity. You buy it because you can't stockpile oil and you don't want to own 37 rental apartments, and you don't want to carry gold bars through airports. That's why you buy Bitcoin. These other things, they're securities, they're software companies and software programs. If you want to invest in Apple or Google or Facebook or some proof of stake network, they're all investments. Make sure you got full and fair disclosure. Make sure you know who owns it. Make sure you know what to expect. But they're investments in technology companies. And Bitcoin's competing with, you're going to warehouse soybeans for a decade? Yeah, it's competing against steel and oil and natural gas and land. And it's a digital property, digital commodity, and it's the highest form of digital commodity. It's digital energy. It's immortal. It'll last forever. You can oscillate it at 1,000 megahertz. It's a cool thing. Let me tell you all about it. If you segment the market like that, it's like, well, I guess I'd like some of that. Well, what else is digital energy? Well, there's another network 100 times smaller. Check out the market cap of the other proof of work networks. They're 50 basis points, 70 basis points of Bitcoin. So they're like, well, I think I want to own the one that's 100 times bigger.
Mm.
Okay. And then go knock on the next door. There's a lot of doors to knock on, right?
That's a good framing. That's a good framing. I mean, what about all the people who are kind of fed up with all of the overreach and shenanigans, particularly over the last 2 years? Because there seems to be, I mean, when I've been out there pitching Bitcoin, there seems to be a craving for the message that I know is more adversarial, but people seem to be wanting or craving, like,
I
how
think
do I?
there's a political party and a political message, which is, the Libertarian Party reflects that message. Less government,
Mm.
right? The Republican Party, you know, reflects a slight difference from the Democratic Party, and the Libertarian Party reflects a bigger difference. The Ron Paul Libertarian Party kind of aligns closest with what the
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoiners would say, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I would say join that party, pursue those politics, but I would brand them as libertarian or create that party. I don't think I would conjoin it with Bitcoin. See see, if your position is you think the government's overreached fiscally, you don't agree with their foreign policy, you don't agree with the tax policy, you don't agree with their domestic policy, you don't agree with their energy policy, you don't agree with their medical policy, you don't agree with their education policy, you don't agree with their trade policy, their tariff policy, their domestic manufacturing policy, their labor and union policies. Sure, but that's politics. You know what I mean? Like that's a lifetime of fights. And remember
Mm.
back to Laser Eyes?
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those fights is just as hard. In fact, probably a lot harder than the Bitcoin fight. So I think that if you said you have to win all those fights for Bitcoin to be successful, right? You're picking 100 other battles to fight, and it's counterproductive and destructive because we need those people. Right? There are people that, in the Democratic Party, we need them to support Bitcoin. There are people in the Republican Party, we need them to support Bitcoin. You might disagree with Republican politics. You might disagree with Democratic politics. The majority of the country, I don't know if it's 50% or 80%, but the majority of the country disagrees with the Libertarian Party. Otherwise, they would have elected somebody by now. So those are political fights, and yeah, the Bitcoin community is very aligned with a lot of those views, right? And so am I. But my point is, you don't need to fix. You're now dealing with the 50% other problems in the world,
Mm.
right? You're trying to fix the schools and fix the hospitals and fix the foreign policy and fix the fiscal policy, and you're trying to. Let's say it a different way. Why is the currency collapsing? Because of all these policy interventions. So if you want to fix the currency, you have to fix 100 things that are radical, that are highly confrontational, that no one can agree on. If you want to fix the fiat currency, or you can simply educate people that Bitcoin is better than gold, and Bitcoin will be $1,000,000 a coin, and you're not going to fix any of those other things. You're just going to fix Bitcoin, and you're going to make everyone that supports Bitcoin 100 times as powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see, like, do you want to actually incrementally do good, or do you just want to fight? Because I think that if you just want to fight, right, you can also go to Ukraine and you can fight on one side or the other side. It's not clear to me. Like, we fought in Iraq for 20 years. What did we fix? Like how much energy do you have to fight over this? And I would say there's no reason why you can't get involved in politics if you want to. I just think that conjoining the politics, it's a mistake for Bitcoin to become associated with one party or the other party. Like, is Bitcoin pro-abortion or anti-abortion? I don't think it's either of those things, right? It's better to stay neutral and stay Switzerland. At the point that the Bitcoin becomes politicized, at that point, 40% of the country will reject you reflexively without listening to
Mm-hmm.
a word you say.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I think
What let's pick any of 100 challenges we have in this country. Name one thing out of the 100 biggest disagreements we have that we have worked through in a civil fashion in the past 10 years.
zero. Yeah.
But so there aren't many, Alex, there aren't examples of political successes
Mm.
in the last 10 years. We don't have many. But there are plenty of examples of technology successes. Uber, technology success, right? Apple, Google, Netflix, Facebook, Disney Plus, what's up? All the games, even arguably cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. Technology successes, we have many. And why? Because technologies are neutral, apolitical. And there's a general consensus in this country that we are technology leaders. Not every country, right? Like, let's say we lived in a fundamentalist religious theocracy that thought that technology was evil from Satan and we would all burn in hell, and they were against newfangled gadgets. Well, then maybe the technology strategy wouldn't be a good one in that country. Like, for example, I don't really think in North Korea, right? North Korea, Cuba, they are against property rights, right? They'll murder you for saying I wish to own private property, right? That's a felony. Okay, so there are certain jurisdictions where they're very hostile to a property strategy. There are theoretical jurisdictions where they'd be hostile to technology strategy, although it's a practical matter. Most people like technology, like even the North Koreans, they were into hacking, right? I mean, they must totally love the guys that hacked the Sony servers, right? To steal all that contraband. So they're not against that. So we're back to this question, right? What can you accomplish? I think, Alex, I'm 57. I'm 57, and so I've gotten dozens of patents, and I've launched dozens of businesses, and I've had lots of ideas, and I love them all. And I've had thousands, tens of thousands of employees, and I've tried different things, and I've spent billions of dollars doing different things. And what I've learned over the course of my life is generally you overestimate what you can accomplish when you have a passion for a good idea. And you underestimate the maintenance cost, and you underestimate how challenging it's going to be to profit and to enjoy that idea. So, like if you have a good business, you have to factor a huge amount of energy. If you work full time to maintain that business, it'll stay effective. As soon as you say, it's like I launch a restaurant and then I go and I open up another restaurant the other side of town, and that's successful. So I go to Chicago and I open up a third one, and then I go to San Francisco and open up the fourth one, and then I go to Miami and open up the fifth one, and I get back to New York City where my first restaurant is, and all my customers are gone and my employees quit. And then the New York Times is writing an article about how my restaurant used to be good, but now the food is garbage. And then the other restaurants, the partners like default on something, or the landlord basically triples the rent, and pretty soon I've like gone bankrupt. Some politician rezones my district, and what you realize is you underestimate all of the challenges, you overestimate what you can accomplish, and people get bored very quickly. So they tend to want to go on and fight the next fight. It's like, Napoleon charging, he lost an entire army charging into Russia on the path to Moscow. Stupid, stupid, stupid. But then he charged into Egypt. Napoleon lost an army in Egypt. Okay, really? Then,
Germans did the same thing.
And the Germans did the same thing, and the Americans, you remember Charlie Wilson's war? Charlie Wilson's war is all about how stupid the Russians are to go in Afghanistan, and how Americans gleefully made fun of the Russians for being so stupid as to go in Afghanistan.
And did the same thing.
And then we did the same thing. It's like, the human can. By the way, Julius Caesar lost an army in Egypt, right? It's a never-ending story, which is people always overestimate what they can accomplish. I launched about 10 businesses. The first one is still the winning business, right? The first one. And what I found is that one you really had to focus on with your heart and soul. And and generally, what you find is in your 30s, someone hits it big and they launch a successful business, and then they think 2 years later, what's my next big success? And they have this idea they're just going to knock off 5 big successes in a row. Okay, and everybody eventually they hit that entropic frontier where they can't compete anymore, and it could be thought of a different way. There's probably 10,000 things you can do, that you can acquire, that you can buy, that you can launch, that you can do. There's probably 100 of them that you can be competitive in, where you're as good as the best person in the world. Everywhere else, yeah, you got in the business, but you're not world class. Maybe 100. And there's probably one of them that you can be competitive in and make a profit at and grow consistently better at over time, such that you stay competitive. Mm-hmm. So that threshold of enter the market, be profitable, make money in the market, and grow forever against the smartest, most competitive people in the market, that is 10,000 times harder than a can you just do it? So people tend to pick fights that they can't win. And then they pick fights that they win, where they win the battle, but they lose the war. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, so what are you going to do if you actually get Russia? Okay. Like, you're not going to be able to govern it. Mm-hmm. You want a fun read the history of William the Conqueror. William the Conqueror, rose through unfortunate circumstance. He was an orphan, and he rose to conquer Normandy, and was a success. Got everything he ever wanted. Got married, had kids, perfect life. And then he decided, he got in his head that he was the rightful heir to the UK, and he had to charge across the channel and conquer Britain. And he's thought 1,000 years later is this great, awesome guy, William the Conqueror. That's his name. He's the only guy in 1,000 years that ever conquered Britain. But if you read the story of what happened, it only took him a couple of weeks to conquer Britain, but he couldn't govern Britain. His entire life fell apart. His family fell apart. His son declared war on him. He fought 2 civil wars against his own son, and eventually he died at war with his own children, and was rolled into a ditch, penniless, couldn't even afford a funeral. This greatest of all conquerors of 1,000 years. And if you read the biography, the conclusion is he overextended, mm-hmm. bit off more than he could chew, because he had a massive ego. And so the story of people with massive egos wanting to right the wrongs of the world is throughout history, everywhere, in every business, every company. It's a 99% mortality rate in my business. They all fail because of bad acquisitions. The reason software companies fail is because the CEO has to keep expanding, mm-hmm. expanding. They have to keep growing. And if you can't grow, and they either try to grow organically and they break the company, or they grow through acquisitions and they break the company. And it's literally like 99% likely. It's just, that's what happens. And so when you look at that, the conclusion you come to is, if you have one good idea, get up every day and figure out how to spread that message, or how to protect that good idea. Like, we shouldn't be trying to fix 27 other problems in the world. What we ought to do is make sure that no one corrupts the Bitcoin code. Right? It's more important, for example, that we don't F with the network and screw it up. It's more important that we protect the integrity of what we have. And 98% of the world doesn't even know what we have. And educating France or educating Germany on why they ought to adopt nuclear reactors, or getting in some massive fight over, government overreach in the medical business, all of these things are just other battles. They're for somebody. But if you really want to be a nuclear activist, I would say you should be 150% focused on
Mm.
that thing, right? Don't tie yourself to any other thing.
You mentioned before, we haven't seen any political wins, which I agree with, but we've seen many technological ones. Do you think we've seen any cultural or social sort of wins or revolutions or comeuppances in the last couple of decades?
I mean, I guess the progressives could argue that. I mean, there have been a lot of progressive, agenda items that have made good progress over time.
Is that more political or cultural? Or do you kind of place them in the same bucket?
Yeah, I think they're the same.
Interesting. Okay. Um, what makes political and cultural the same in your mind?
There are there are cultural wars, but let's take critical race theory, right, or something going on in the school system, or teaching any particular theories in school. The reason they're political is because the government controls the school system, and the government control, and so the political unions contribute to the party, which contributes, guidance to the government. The government changes the rules uh, to spread a certain policy through the schools.
Mm.
To the extent that the government has power over whatever, right?
So it becomes cultural in that sense. So it's kind of like top-down cultural enforcement instead of bottom-up emergent culture, which is, I mean, naturally how it was. Anyway, that's
Look,
something.
politics matter, right? So there's no doubt.
Mm,
Like politics shut down the nuclear power industry,
mm,
right? Politics do matter in a lot of places. Politics resulted in, say, single family homes getting subsidized by the government via Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and that drove down the cost of home mortgages, and it drove up the price of homes, and it shifted the dynamic, and it enriched a lot of people in the real estate industry, right? So politics do matter. I'm not saying they don't matter. What I'm saying is that if you believe that Bitcoin is good for the human race and good for the civilization, you should limit your political engagement to what's good for Bitcoin and not get involved in all the
all the
other
rest of the
political
shit.
fights.
Okay.
The other political fights make you toxic because half the politicians, right, take a position, right, and you're going to actually alienate 30-40% of the politicians, and you might need those politicians. There's if if we come back to the way a company acts, right, like let's take the Disney Corporation. No, the Disney challenges they've got in Florida of late with Disney World, they got political.
Mm,
Companies shouldn't be political. They shouldn't express
true.
political preferences this way or that. Remember the old phrase "shut up and sing."
Hmm.
If you're a singer, you want everybody in the audience to love you for your song. As soon as you start to express a political opinion, whether it's right or left or whatever it is, then there's going to be somebody in the audience that's going to take offense, and you've just diminished your ability to spread your actual message. So the question is, what are you trying to do? Are you trying
Mm.
to sing a song, or are you trying to actually spread a political message? If you were a really good rock and roll singer, I wouldn't say go on stage and say gold sucks, Bitcoin is good. Like, right? Because your agenda is to entertain the audience, right? So being professional means keeping your personal views out of your
Out. Yeah.
professional platform. So I just think generally, if you're going to be professional, if you're professionally pursuing the agenda of fixing the energy and the civilization via Bitcoin, and if you believe that Bitcoin is great technology, which will be great money, which could be a great currency, which can fix a lot of things, you're better off to just stay professional and cheerfully, constructively advocate for Bitcoin. You're going to find people that disagree with you and they hate you or they hate Bitcoin. But like, if when somebody that's really a critic or a hater on, say, Twitter, when they say something really offensive, I don't go and directly attack them. That's not going to persuade anybody. They
Hmm.
have 5 million followers that follow them because they respect what they have to say. So if you attack that person, you alienate their followers. And if you engage in a debate with anybody about any subject other than Bitcoin, you're potentially alienating followers. So, I mean, in this particular case, the constructive engagement is if you're going to troll somebody, is to say, you have that point of view. There are some people that happen to have this point of view, and this is the reason they have this point of view. And here is a place you can go to get more information. Right? Like you can turn a conversation 90 degrees. Like sometimes you think that Bitcoin is bad because you think it's a currency, but did you know it's actually, we think of it as a property, not a currency, right? Someone will say Bitcoin is bad because it's bad for the because it's a currency, and I like the U.S. dollar, and so I don't like Bitcoin. Remember, Donald Trump said that once. I
Hmm.
like the
Hmm.
U.S. dollar, I don't
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Bitcoin. The response is not you're not smart enough, right? The response is don't say, if you were smarter, you wouldn't say that. Don't say that. The response is, well, actually, I understand why you would say that. Other people have been led to believe it's a currency because of the phrase cryptocurrency. But in fact, we've come to see that it's actually a property and it's been designated as a property by the IRS. So it's a digital gold superior to gold in every way. And if you like gold, you might like Bitcoin a bit better than gold, but it is not a threat to the country or to the currency. Now, that might not persuade the person that was against Bitcoin, but the 500,000 people that read the comment will look at it, and maybe 10% of them would be persuaded. And if you flip 10% of 500,000 people, you just got 50,000 new comments by being polite and respectful and constructive
Mm.
and not confrontational, but just engaging. Now, some people won't even let you engage that much, right? I mean, and you have to judge that. The ideal thing to do, though, is to engage in a technical, constructive fashion to educate. While you empathize. Like, I empathize with you. You want to help the world, and you think that Bitcoin is bad because someone is taking advantage of someone here. But Bitcoin is actually good because of this and this and this and this, and this will help the world and help you achieve your mission. If we go out every day and we explain to people how they can achieve their goals in life with our technology, we won't persuade everybody, but you'll have the least toxic pushback.
Mm. Do you think what's your thoughts about the growing number of people who, for example, have something against property? So, I mean, Mark Moss and I wrote this thing here as an answer to kind of the collectivist ideology, and I mean, communism in a phrase obviously was summed up as the abolition of private property. So there
Yes,
seems to be a growing number of people who want people to own nothing and be happy.
I I think that the right. I don't think it's that constructive to attack powerful entity, like attacking the World Bank or attacking the IMF or attacking the World Economic Forum. I don't think it's that constructive because they don't think that they're against anything. They think they're trying to help.
Mm.
And 40% of the society doesn't think any different. So all you're doing is isolating yourself. Let's take a place where they don't like property. Cuba, they don't like property. Like it's illegal to own anything. North Korea, it's illegal to own anything. They don't like property. Okay, I wouldn't suggest that you fly to North Korea and take out a banner and campaign to try to change the country. They're just going to shoot you,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, like, so the point really is if someone is really totally against property, um, rather than, you know, you want to go campaign for regime change in North Korea? Like, what's that doing for your family, right? Like, how's that helping everybody in America? A better idea is you have 250 million or 350 million people in the United States that believe in property right in front of your face. Why don't you just go introduce Bitcoin to them and get 1,000 times more powerful?
Do you think the
If you're
number
going to
is?
go to war with
Mm,
another country, why don't you go ahead and get 1,000 times more powerful before you pick that fight,
hmm Yeah,
right?
well, I think that sentence there sums up the entire position. Is
And it's the other issue is sometimes people are looking to be disagreeable. Like you can, for example, the head of the IMF is actually a pretty intelligent economist, and she said some things that are very positive about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. You could either embrace that and say, "Look, it looks like she understands what's going on," and you could be, focusing upon convincing the IMF to embrace Bitcoin because it helps them achieve their mission, or you could just reject every banker everywhere in the world that works for any entity that there are people that are still mad about what happened on Jekyll Island 100 years ago, right? But the point is, when you're tweeting, Neil Kashkari's Time interview from 10 years ago, right? You're just being confrontational. On the other hand, if you just embrace the actors and the institutions today, then you're being cooperative. And what we ought to be trying to do is persuade them and win them over, as opposed to, do you really want to remind someone that they should fight with you and you're their mortal enemy forever? Right? Like, if if you declare war on someone, what that means is they need to declare war back on you. So I don't see it's constructive to pick those fights. I If someone says something you find disagreeable, you can choose to say they're my enemy forever because of a character flaw. Or you can choose to say, they said something I find disagreeable because they were misinformed or hadn't focused on the matter, and no one has explained to them why they should adopt the opposite point of view. You see, if you take the second view, you're just going to go educate them, and at the very least, you're not going to be toxic. If you take the former view, then you're going to cause them to be 100x more confrontational toward you than they otherwise would be, right? So you're actually kind of undermining your own interest to pick those fights. I I don't think you need to. I think it's okay to say, look, Bitcoin is great for people that like property rights, and let me explain to you why this is aligned with property rights and freedom and technology and integrity. I think that's fine. I think I think flipping it and saying, no, we're freedom fighters. And so I'm going to go off to the Middle East and I'm going to fight for the freedom rights of this faction or that faction. Like now you got the tail wagging the dog, or you lost the plot. The goal is not to fight over 100 other things. The goal is not to right all of the wrongs in the world that you disagree with. That's like angry young man behavior. The goal is to win.
mm,
And the way you win is focus and don't make enemies. Right? It's easy to make enemies. It feels good, by the way. You know, it's like for example, it's like Elon Musk tweets something, and some people want to go and attack him this way and that, and then they find out he's going to own Twitter. It's like, oops. like the thing that I find really amusing is people will go and engage in a massive ad hominem attack on an individual where they just disparage their character and everything else because they said something that the person disagreed with, and then they forget it, and 3 months later they want to go and engage with that same person or get their help. And I think what you find is, look, if you look at the blue checks, among the blue checks, 95% of the time they're very polite to each other. And that's because they have something to lose. They're named and they have a reputation, and it will reflect badly upon them, their constituents, and their reputation if they act in a toxic fashion. It undermines their institution, their career, their credibility. On the other hand, anonymous actors on Twitter, especially the small nim accounts, they don't stand for an institution, and they don't necessarily have that same reputation. They will go and be very, very toxic. And I, I can see the benefits of speaking truthfully and putting information on the record. But the issue with the toxicity is, like, if you're toxic to me, Alex, do you know what I do on Twitter when someone's toxic to me? I look for about 100 milliseconds, block, and never think about them for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you literally will get 100 milliseconds. I don't type, you've been rude, I'm blocking you, right? I'm not going to literally click more than one button. I'm going to block. And when I do, you will never ever, right, be able to engage in my stream ever again. So I think the blue checks, they know that. They're like, if one of them is like, I wouldn't go and be rude to someone with 5 million followers because they just block me, and I will lose access to all 5 million of their followers forever. Maybe I would like to be able to say something to forget about the people. Think about the 5 million people underneath them, right? You need to get to those people. So being polite and constructive means that you stay engaged in the conversation. As soon as you just slightly tweak it to be ad hominem, the best you can hope for is they mute you, but the more likely thing is they block you. And that same dynamic happens on other platforms and in the real world, which is you're just completely out of the conversation. So your goal is to persuade someone. It's like if you're a salesperson, you know this. If you spent 20 years selling to someone, you show up, they have the money, you want to make the sale, so they start by telling you you're stupid and you're ugly and you're poorly dressed and you're not as smart as them, and they could do your job better than you could do the job. And the competitor gave a better price and blah blah blah, and they just trash you. You just smile and nod, and then they tell you they're not going to buy from you, and you say, well, I'll be here when you're ready, and you go home, and maybe like 3 years later you show up and you get the sale.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get the sale, you don't say, well, you really were rude to me and you were a jerk. You just take the money and smile. The customer is always right. Because you could do the opposite, right? You could just say, I don't want your money, you were a jerk to me. Okay. But the bottom line is, most people are jerks, like at some point in their life. And by the time you X out all of the people that you find disagreeable, there's nobody left to do business with. And there's no and you've been X'd out of the society, so you're going to have to live on an island somewhere, and try generating your own electricity and fishing for your own food on the island, and hope you never have to replace or take out your appendix or something, because it'll be difficult. So we have to get along with each other. We don't have to correct each other's flaws. We don't have to win every battle. All we need to do is just educate the world.